Welcome to Arthouse Legends, where high art and geek culture collide. This is the MovieDude Eric, and you're watching FilmViews, the show that asks the simple question, what makes a great movie? And with me today is a guest that I am still really can't believe that I'm actually talking to. I've got Cecil from GoodBadFlicks.
Thanks for having me.
Believe it or not, I actually got a story before we open up. You see, about a year and a half ago, I had saw this movie on Turner Classic Movies that I still can't believe that it took me this long to see. It was called Night of the Comet. And after I saw this movie, I was like, why have I never seen this before? I was so much in love with this that I do what I normally do when I see something great. I go and look for other people who have seen it and watch and listen to their stuff. And I came across Night of the Comet, and with this show titled GoodBadFlicks, which with a title like that, you obviously have to check that out because that just sounds really awesome. And I think after I saw that episode, it took me 2 weeks to go through your entire catalog. I loved your show, and I still do. And whenever I see a new episode coming on, I'm really excited, and especially when you do your exploring episodes and your kind of commentaries, which are, in my opinion, some of the best out there. So
Thank you.
I'm really glad that we got a chance to talk. So let's start things off on the proper note. Cecil, out of curiosity, what is the most recent movie you've seen, and what did you think of it?
Last night I just saw Suicide Squad, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought that there were a couple of little nitpicks here and there, but overall I thoroughly enjoyed it. I liked what they did with it, and I was kind of baffled by how poorly it's doing critically. I mean, I was irritated, and then one thing that was really nice is there are some movies where because I put up the review like in the middle of the night last night after I got home, and the comments that have been coming in for the most part, the audience has really liked it. I would say majority of the commenters are like, I saw the critical reviews of this saying how terrible it was, and I went in expecting the worst and ended up being really, like overjoyed. It was exactly the kind of movie that I was hoping it would be. And it's funny, like, then you have a lot of other people that are, throwing the Rotten Tomatoes score around, and they're like, oh, it's got a 30% of Rotten Tomatoes. And it's like, well, that honestly doesn't mean anything to me, because there are movies that Rotten Tomatoes holds in higher, they give it their fresh award, and I think that they're garbage. And then vice versa. There's movies that they have given rotten, and I've thoroughly enjoyed. So it all comes down to what you like. And I think that some movies are scrutinized a little bit more than others. So, but anyway, Suicide Squad was really entertaining, and I was happy to see that not only the commenters were enjoying it, but a lot of other larger YouTubers liked it as well. Angry Joe liked it.
To say they liked it was being slightly demure. I saw his episode this morning, and he. I think he's lit a gasket or something, because I don't think I've seen him this happy about a movie since. I actually don't know. I think, especially after his middling on Batman v Superman specifically, I thought it was kind of interesting to just see his eyes light up and his, like, what the hell are these critics talking about? So yeah, I yes, he really enjoyed that.
Yeah, he really liked it. So it was nice because like there are times where a movie will come along that maybe is getting like bashed by the critics that I end up enjoying, and vice versa. A movie that's getting critically acclaimed that I think is garbage, and people are saying you're just being contrarian, and I'm like, no, I'm being honest. I'll tell you, it's if I don't like something, I explain what I do and don't like. It's not like I just come out and say, and scream and throw a fit. I talk about, what I think worked, what I think didn't work, and why it didn't work for me. And in certain cases too, like recently, the most recent Star Trek,
Beyond.
From Beyond, yeah, Star Trek Beyond, like Star Trek from Beyond, no, Star Trek Beyond. Star Trek Beyond, I thought it made for a good science fiction movie, but a bad Star Trek movie. And there were a lot of people that were really upset. They're, oh, this is the best of the new Star Treks and all that. And I'm like, that's great. I'm glad that you enjoyed it. You know, a $200 million movie, you know, it would be a disaster if just nobody liked it. So if you liked it, great. That's fantastic. I'm just, for me personally, I didn't care for it, and I'm not a I'm a big Star Trek fan, but I am not what you would call like a Trekker or Trekkie, but I do like thoroughly get into the series, the various different ones and the movies, and so I didn't think that. I didn't think that it was as good as it could have been. It felt a little too much, a little too actiony for me, but there were a lot of people that really loved it. So great, you know?
Well, this is actually a really good transition because one of the reasons why I find Good Bad Flicks a very fascinating show is that you actually look at movies that are, in a way, mostly considered to be either kitschy or in some cases really bad. One of the ones that I come across after a year of the comment that I found very fascinating was that you had this discovery of the Blair Witch 2, which I'll be honest, when I saw that in theaters, I was furious coming out of that. And after listening to what you had to say about Blair Witch 2, you actually made me reconsider what I thought of this particular movie, and I especially like it when someone does challenge me on my conceived notions on film. So I guess really the first question I really want to really bring up is, what is your definition of a good bad flick?
Well, it kind of varies. I mean, a lot of people chalk it up to like a movie that's so bad it's good, something like Birdemic or The Room, or something that is just like reprehensible and bad, but it ends up being entertaining. And had I had known that this was eventually going to become my career, I might have come up with a different title, because I think with some people they don't really understand a lot of what I'm talking about. When I'm saying good bad flick, I'm not saying movies that are so good or so bad they're good. I'm kind of talking about good and bad. I'm talking about movies that are maybe misunderstood, or cult classics, or movies that are completely overlooked, or movies that they don't get as much recognition as they should. Movies that have had a pivotal role in things that have come down the road, but they're sometimes glossed over. Like recently, I did a video where I was talking about Blade, and Blade now is kind of glossed over, and it's got bad CGI and whatnot. But the thing is, Blade, what a lot of people don't realize, was the first step towards Marvel eventually getting to where they are now. If it wasn't for the success of Blade, it wouldn't have given 20th Century Fox the extra, like, they were already working on an X-Men movie, but they were kind of dragging their heels on it. Like, they had been working on it for a couple years, and they were just, But what happened was Blade ended up being a really big hit, and they were like, oh, wait a minute, people maybe do want comic book movies. So they put an extra push behind the X-Men movie. The first X-Men, which came out in 2000, ended up being a monumental hit. And then after that, there were all the Marvel films. And then eventually Marvel got bought by Disney. And now we have the gigantic, Marvel Cinematic Universe that is just a billion-dollar machine. And all of that comes back down to this little, comic book movie that had it have been a flop, it's very possible we would not have the Marvel Cinematic Universe that we have today. So stuff like that, I think, is really important, and it makes for something interesting to talk about and to listen to. And that's what a lot of internet reviewers and internet people aren't really talking about. A lot of times they're just, talking, oh, okay, this movie just came out in theaters and it completely sucks.
Well, Well, I think it's kind of interesting, especially, when you talk about internet reviewers and especially YouTube reviewers. In fact, I will say that In most cases, I would actually go to the YouTube reviewers specifically over the more tried and true critics, because one thing I found very fascinating, especially more recently, is how the more mainstream critics they'll kind of just give this kind of snippet, and it's like they're just looking for a way to either over glorify a film or to kind of like shrug it off. Whereas with especially on with the more kind of fly by the seat of their pants critics that you find on YouTube, they will find some unique and interesting ideas and perspectives on a film that you don't really get to see, and that I feel is really missing in kind of the more critical looks at a film. You know, you go to a horror film fanatic, and they will have a unique perspective on horror films that that the mainstream critic will just not have, because they're more interested in kind of the overall picture, not really kind of looking at what these films are specifically targeting. And especially when you did like I said, Blair Witch 2. You also did House of the Dead 2, which was actually your discussion on House of the Dead 2 actually got me to see that, considering that House of the Dead 1 is still, in my opinion, one of the most awful things. That's one of the things I wish I could just go back and scrub out of my brain, having ever seen. But you actually got me to see House of the Dead 2, and your assessment of that, when you wouldn't get with just your mainstream critic. And so I think it's one of those things where, especially when it comes to critics, and especially when it comes to what we're now seeing with genre, that you just, there's something that is missing in kind of the, what we now consider to be critic just not getting.
I think a large part of that comes from the fact that some of the critics, I won't say all, but I will say a lot of the mainstream critics have gotten to the point where they've seen so many movies that I think that they hate movies. Because if you look at a lot of the quote unquote top critics, their the catchphrase or the byline or whatever, where they'll talk about a movie, it's like they're looking for a way to just throw like a quick jab into it. How can I insult this movie? The one that always comes to mind, and it's a tad bit old, but it stands true. There was a movie, Johnny Mnemonic, that came out years ago, back in the 90s. And there were so many critics that their opening line was more like Johnny Moronic. And like, it's just like you're trying to be funny, and you're trying to inject your nonsense into it, instead of just being like, okay, I didn't like this film, or here's what it did wrong, here's what it did right. And I think a lot of mainstream critics, again, going back to that, they don't like certain kinds of films. Like Roger Ebert was notorious for hating horror films. So whenever they had to review a horror film, it was almost a guarantee that he was going to give it a thumbs down. And the problem was, something like that factors a little bit more into today, where you have something like Rotten Tomatoes, where it's this aggregator, where it's taking all of these critical reviews and throwing it together. Well, if you have somebody like Roger Ebert, who he's not around anymore, but when you would have somebody like that who would automatically give a horror movie a thumbs down. There are a lot of other critics that just automatically will give a horror movie a bad rating. And when you take that in and factor it all in with something like an aggregator, then it makes the movie look like it's crap, because it's only got like a 50% or whatever. And people like to throw around the Rotten Tomatoes thing like it's the word of God. Oh, it only got this percent, it sucks. Yeah. Well, if it's a movie that you're interested in, why don't you find a critic who you think is kind of more on your level, somebody who likes the kind of stuff that you like. I mean, God, there is a million different critics out there. You're sooner or later going to find somebody who is more in line with your way of thinking, and then maybe go off of that instead of just going to this one place and expecting them to tell you what you're allowed to like and dislike.
That's true. Now, another thing that I found very interesting, and this is actually something that I've noticed when you do kind of like your top 10 of the year and some of your Netflix recommendations, is that you really kind of show kind of a disinterest in what is normally considered to be great films, films that are a lot majorly critically acclaimed. And I found that you're very unique in how you look at films. But out of curiosity, what are some of the things that turn you off of a movie that normally is considered to be great?
Well, I mean, some movies are artsy for the sake of being artsy. For like, I
Art house
like
bullshit.
Yeah, art house bullshit. Like, I like artistic movies. I like Only God Forgives and Eraserhead and 2001. Like, I like art house movies, but there has to be an element of pureness to them. There has to be something genuine there. And when you have a movie that is critically acclaimed, but I think is complete rubbish, you have something like Juno, where everybody was raving about how wonderful it was, and it opened like a music video, and everybody is using this like try hard lingo that nobody talks like that, and it's nonstop Moldy Peaches music. It was way too much. It was like they were just trying so hard to be hip, and it was infuriating. That's a movie that I absolutely hate. That's on like one of my all-time, least favorite list. But I think as far as like a lot of other movies that are critically loved but disliked, critically loved and loved by the public, stuff like The Hangover. Comedies are tough with me because I do have a juvenile sense of humor, but I also like intelligent humor and I like dark comedies. But with something like The Hangover, it was so forced. It was like, set up, joke, set up, joke every single time. Mm-hmm. It was like, hey, there's a tiger in the bathroom. Did you see there's a tiger in the bathroom? Oh my God, there's a tiger in the bathroom. And like that, it just was awful, and I hated it. And I remember actually at the time when I was employed, I used to be a full-time video editor, and now I do the YouTube videos full-time. Mm-hmm. But at the time I was a video editor, and one of the guys I'd worked with, the movie had just come out on DVD, and we were watching it in the office, and we had a big screen where we'd watch TV and whatnot. Anyway, him and some of the other guys are sitting there, and they're just in hysterics laughing, and I'm just sitting there and I'm like, here's where the joke's gonna go, here's the joke, and they're like, why don't you think it's funny? And I'm like, I don't know, I guess my brain works differently. So with something like The Hangover though, and Juno, I usually don't say that movies are bad, but with stuff like that I'll say they're bad. They're terrible movies.
Well, another thing I kind of noticed about your work specifically is that you really don't harbor on bad stuff, even stuff that you consider to be, that you consider to be bad. You are more positive towards film than I think a lot of other. I don't want to call you a critic. I feel like you more discuss film, or do you consider yourself a critic specifically, or? Not really. I don't really know what I am. I mean, I critique movies, yes, but I kind of more talk about movies. So a lot of times I just say critic because it's easier and most people just kind of get that. Mm-hmm. But then they'll go and they'll watch one of my videos and they're like, this isn't a movie, review. And I'm like, well, there are things on my channel that are labeled movie review, and those are the movie reviews. And then there's other ones. There's GoodBadFlicks, where I kind of talk about the movies and kind of poke a little bit of fun at them. There is the exploring ones, where I talk about the history behind the film and the problems they went through and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So
I don't know. I mean, it's just usually I just will say, critic, because it's just that umbrella that a lot of people will put over it. As far as like being more positive, that was one of the reasons why I started doing this, because there's so much negativity on the internet, especially when it comes to movies. And I got annoyed with that because a lot of these movies are entertaining, they're good. They might not be for everybody, but they do have their audience. And I felt that I should give them some attention and talk about that. So the thing is, I love movies. Like, I genuinely love movies. Like, when I sit down and watch a movie and it's really good, it's just awesome. Like, it makes me so happy. And I've worked on a lot of smaller, and when I say smaller, I mean like, $100 productions.
Mm-hmm.
So I do, know a lot of the inner workings of like really grassroots small movie making. But I also have friends of mine who I've worked with on some films that they work on reality TV shows. They've done some movies themselves. They've worked with much larger, people in the industry. And so I pulled in a lot of that information and learned a lot from them as well by working with them. So I kind of have a little bit more insight into the industry than a lot of people. I mean, I'm not, the Quentin Tarantino or anything,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not just somebody who, went to film school and kind of been pulling that information from there. I do have a lot of knowledge of movies, and that's one of the reasons why, um, even if a movie is bad, I still try to look at what went into it, because movies aren't made by like two people.
Yeah.
Movies are made by teams of people, in some case hundreds, in some case thousands of people. And to just have a movie that comes out and it fails on some level, that sucks, because there's a lot of people that worked on it. It's not just the actors and the director, it's the producers and the special effects people and the gaffer and there's so many people that worked in that, and just to dismiss something, it sucks. So that's why I like to talk about a lot of movies that maybe are getting glossed over, and give them some attention. And one of the things that's cool is it's turned a lot of people on to movies that they maybe never heard of. And in the case of something like the Blair Witch Project 2, you're seeing how there really, there is a good movie there. It's just that it was so screwed up by the studio. And it's not the fault of the movie itself. It's the fault of the people behind the scenes that thought they knew better.
That's very true. Uh, Considering that a lot of the stuff that you deal with is in the kind of the horror, fantasy, and genre elements specifically. Um, you did something that I think it was, I want to say about a year ago, not a year ago, like a few months ago, where you took the current Blumhouse very cheap horror film genre. I forgot exactly what they call it now, but this kind of $5 million type of horror, and you really kind of analyzed it to a point that even I was really impressed with, especially with the ridiculous, cheap ways that they create scares. That's basically meant just as something to get people into to theaters. Especially your take on the whole final scare thing, I thought was, I think I kind of laughed hard enough that my neighbors could hear me on that, specifically because I've just seen so many of these. But out of curiosity, with horror films specifically, because this is a genre that is kind of in a transitional period, what are some of the things that you would hope to see them kind of either revitalize, or unique new ways that that horror films can move forward?
Um, well, what I like out of horror, I mean, I like all kinds of horror, but a majority of horror movies I don't particularly find scary. I find entertaining. The movies that scare the hell out of me are the slow burn horror films, movies like It Follows and The
Mhm.
Exorcist and The Innkeepers, and stuff like that, where it's all about atmosphere and it's all about just the concept and the notion of what's happening within the film. And I think that we need to kind of get back to I don't want to say a little bit more high art horror films, but horror films that that you kind of get invested in and that you start to like get to know the characters and then you see what they're going through and then you're worried about them, like the original Halloween.
Mhm.
Even though there was a fairly large body count within that, you got to know the different characters and you saw what was going on and you saw these kids getting murdered. I know
Mhm.
it's very scary. And now we've gotten to the point of where um, because of a lot of the old slasher films, the new generation, a lot of the people that are making it, they're not understanding that um, the old Friday the 13th, a lot of the characters in there, like they were 25, 30 years old playing teenagers, but they were supposed to be, here's the nerdy kid and the jock and this kid, they were all supposed to be archetypes, but they were people. They were, some of them good, some of them bad. But in later years, they all became cannon fodder. So you could watch a movie like that was the difference between like the original Friday the 13th and then the remake of Friday the 13th. The original Friday the 13th, you got to know the characters, you kind of liked them, and then you felt bad when they started getting killed, and you didn't want them to get killed in it, so it made you a little bit more invested in it. In the remake of Friday the 13th, all of the characters were awful human beings and they were cannon fodder. You
Yeah.
wanted them all to get murdered. So that was why, like, you're watching it and you're like, oh, yeah, that instead of being like, oh, no, that I can't believe they killed so and so.
Well, I
So,
think if you really look at it, that really came. I don't want to blame Freddy Krueger for too much of this, but let's be honest here. By the mid '80s, the horror genre had gotten to the point where we were excited for the next kill. Tom Savini's work and all of the great visual effects that we had gotten in horror films made it to the point where our brains were eager for the next thing to occur, and we weren't no longer scared of what was happening to them, which is something that I think. And again, when it comes to the latter Nightmare on Elm Street films, it especially got really bad. And that's, when we got to Scream and we got to, the next generation, they just kept playing it because our visual effects got better. And so obviously the kills had to get better. But do you kind of see it in that particular realm, or do you feel that we've gotten even more nihilistic to that point?
I think lately we've kind of gotten more nihilistic, also because of the fact that so many horror audiences have the attention span of a gnat. So, like, I see a lot of especially horror films in a theater, so
Hmm.
I can review them. And I went the original Sinister, I think, is brilliant, with the exception of the jump scare ending.
Yeah.
I think the movie is just fantastic, and it's really frustrating because they kind of, as I said in my video, they not forced it, but were like, "Hey, it would be really good if we did this," and they did it, and it was the one thing in the movie that I didn't like.
I think that's kind of with Jason Blum putting it in the contract with every filmmaker. It's like, oh, by the way, you have to end it with a jump scare.
Yeah. I mean, and that was the thing, is I showed my video, it was like I believe it was 5 of like the 8 or 9 Blumhouse horror films that had final scares in it, and it's like, so that's pretty much like a more than a 50% chance. If you go to
Hmm.
see a movie, you're going to get a final scare. And the thing was, when I saw Sinister 2 in theaters, it had none of the original creative team involved. It was a whole new director, writer, everything. And in what they did with Sinister 2 was they kind of turned it into just like another just mindless film. It wasn't a scary ghost movie anymore. It was just really awful.
Well,
And there were so many jumps. And the thing was, in front of me, when I saw it, there was a row of just, 13, 14-year-old girls, and they were terrified. They were jumping at everything, and then they were getting on, they were pulling out their cell phones. And so this is the audience that, a lot of horror is pandering to.
well,
And that's one of the reasons why I think it's doing so bad.
Well, yeah, when you say that, you remind me of a theatrical experience I had when I went and saw I Know What You Did last summer in theaters. And it was opening weekend, so obviously it was packed with teenagers. And, well, I was a teenager at the time, but, but when certain scares occurred, and let's be honest here, I Know What You Did last summer is not exactly a scary movie. But just when you had that shriek, all of a sudden, there would be one or two girls in the audience that would scream their ears off, and then everyone would kind of get a laugh out of it. And so it's kind of a weird situation with horror. It's like, yeah, they want the girlfriend to scream because it gets the other audience members to kind of get invested. But yeah, it's detrimental to whatever suspense and tension that they were trying to build. But especially with what I found very interesting about your assessment, which was the complete lack of sound. It's like they try to build you up so they could boo you, at that moment. And I didn't really even consider that, even though now I feel ridiculous not catching on to it. It took me this long.
Well, it's like, sometimes you just don't notice things until it's pointed out. And that's like, I see, so many movies, and I see so many movie posters. I see so much just media that I've kind of developed like an eye and an ear for it, I guess you could say. So whenever I'm watching a more recent horror film and they would pull that nonsense, like it's, somebody's walking down the hallway and it's quiet, and I'm like, all right, they're going to do one of two things. They're either going to do, a turn, he's going to turn a corner and there's going to be something there and it's going to be a loud scare, or he's going to turn, there's going to be nothing there. The camera's going to pan around and it's going to be behind them. And I'm just like, it's just done time and time again. And I'm like, how do people keep falling for this?
Oh man, it's the stupid teenager running up the stairs kind of thing. If one thing, yeah, horror films have gotten lazy, which is interesting because horror is one of the genres that gives us some of our best and brightest filmmakers. I still find it very strange that Peter Jackson came from this, and even like Ron Howard has done a thing in horror.
James Cameron.
Yes, it's like, yeah, and yet this is a genre that has fed heavily off of tropes and stereotypes, and as soon as someone does something ingenious, Texas Chainsaw Massacre I think is probably one of the biggest examples of this, then all of a sudden everyone's clamoring to do the exact same thing. I mean, Friday the 13th basically turned every holiday into a horror film. I mean, just in that alone. So yeah, it still just baffles me. But
well, I think I was just going to say, I think with the majority of mainstream horror films are the cliche-ridden, just bastardizations of good ideas that are there to, bring in the teenagers. And I really find that the majority of the films that are the genuinely good horror films, the ones that scare people, the ones that people will be talking about for years to come, are a lot of the independent films. I mean, Texas Chainsaw Massacre was an independent film. It Follows was independent. The Innkeepers, The House of the Devil. There's so many smaller films that are made for very little comparatively money than something like Ouija. Where that was, I mean, even though, Ouija was like a $5 million film, but even that is a fairly large amount. But I crack up when it's like, here's a horror film and it's like God, what was the Haunting?
Mm-hmm.
It was the 100, or actually I don't think it was 100 because I was back, but it was something I know was maybe 70 million or
Yeah,
something,
it was a big budget. Yeah.
and it was just like it was all visual effects, and I did think that the visual effects they did were good, but it wasn't even the tiniest bit scary, and it kind of is a shame because I think that there's so many amazing smaller horror films that I think are really scary. And then when I try to, talk to people about them, they'll, oh my God, I just saw, this movie and it was terrifying. And I'm like, okay, well, I just saw Paranormal Activity and that was terrifying. That movie was boring and stupid. Nothing happened. And it's like, well, you have to invest yourself into the movie. If
Yeah.
you're going to sit there with the lights on and looking at your cell phone, then you're not going to get scared.
Well, when it comes to Paranormal Activity, I've had arguments over Paranormal Activity, which the first one I believe is actually brilliant because it's not about a ghost; it's about a bad relationship. That's really what that film is. And when I show people exactly why this film is good at, because if you look at it from the relationship perspective, it's really bad jerk is basically taunting and tormenting his girlfriend and is basically encouraging all this stuff to happen. And you're looking at it from the relationship perspective, not the ghost, not the demon, but the relationship. That is when the horror really starts to take place because it isn't about this force that's coming in. It's about this guy that's overwhelming his girlfriend and is causing her torment till we get to the final revelation. Which again, if you look at the relationship and then look at that final moment in the film, it again puts that into perspective. And yet, people, especially when it comes to horror, I think that there's also that lack of expectation with horror. Another one that really surprised me is I saw William Friedkin's Bug, and I found that to be disturbing and distraught. I was there with a bunch of horror fanatics, and none of them understood what they thought it was just horrible because they didn't understand or they didn't care for what that movie was trying to do. But it's interesting because horror does need that kind of overhaul, right? I mean, it needs that new blood coming. I mean, we have Ty West, which you mentioned a few of his films. Adam Wingard, who I don't know if he's still doing horror films or not. I hope that he doesn't leave the genre altogether, but I know that he's now kind of a big thing right now. But are there any other genres or any other filmmakers that you would like to see kind of give that overhaul to these particular genres?
Well, just on to mention Adam Wingard, he is very much staying with horror. He's doing the Blair Witch sequel, which looks
Nice.
phenomenal. He's also doing the American remake of Death Note, which if anybody else was doing it, I probably would be annoyed, but I think that he'll put a very cool, unique spin on it. I've just loved everything that he's done, so I'm super excited. But as far as other genres that need help, I am currently irritated with action because in the 80s and
Mm-hmm.
90s,
We
and
were
even
spoiled. Come on, we were spoiled.
oh my God, there were, yeah, Die Hard and just, so many amazing action movies. And I think that the biggest problem now is you've got directors like Paul Greengrass, who I think is one of the worst directors ever, and he's done a bunch of the Bourne movies.
Mm-hmm.
And they all suffer from the shaky camera too close to the action, and then quick cuts to the nth degree. So, here comes an action sequence, and the camera is shaking like crazy, and it's cut, 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 and then and then the end. So you don't really know who's doing what. You can't tell who's punching who, and until it's over, you just kind of assume, all right, well, Jason Bourne just beat up a room full of guys. I don't know how, but it's infuriating because we had so many amazing movies. I grew up watching a lot of like kung fu theater and stuff, and you had one camera shots where it was just two guys beating the hell out of each other and just had these amazing fights that were choreographed. And then that transitioned over into a lot of, the 80s and 90s stuff where it was the bullet ballet. They would be shooting and just gunfire and all kinds of, punches and kicks and this, that, and the other thing. And it was just amazing. And it was done. The camera was back far enough. They didn't cut all the time. And you got to see all the action. And now, because so many of the action movies are trying to be PG-13, they do the quick cuts and the quick edits and the shaky cam so that you can't really see what was going on. A big one was it wasn't per se an action movie, but there were action sequences, was the Hunger Games movies.
I had a feeling you were going to go there, and that was actually what I was exactly thinking about when you were talking about this as well. Especially the first one. Again, it's one of those things like when they announced that they were doing the Hunger Games as a movie, I was asking myself, how are they going to get away with a PG-13 movie about child murder? I mean, even rated R movies are terrified of dealing with this particular subject. And then, of course, they did the whole shaky thing. And so it's one of those things like, okay, I can understand and I respect what they did in order to get this movie to be made. There was no way that they were going to get, you were going to be able to see children getting slaughtered en masse, in long takes.
But then I go and I watch, now granted, I know a lot of people were angry about the Hunger Games. And they were saying it was a remake of Battle Royale. And I'm like, no, similar themes, but completely different movies. Because I think that the Hunger Games, the first book was good. The other ones kind of trailed off. But I think that it was, they were their own thing. And the Battle Royale movies were their own thing. They were similar but different. But you go and you watch a thing like that, and it's like, okay, here they take a bunch of kids, put them on an island, and have them murder each other. And it was the kind of stuff that we couldn't get away with in the U.S. And it's funny too, because if you go back, like I've spent a lot of time going back and watching movies that were around from before I was born, and watching so many movies from like the 70s and whatnot, and they got, I think the first 10 minutes of Assault on Precinct 13, and a 9-year-old kid gets shot by the ice cream man.
Seriously.
So, I mean, there was a time when, that was, I don't want to say it was okay, but it wasn't like this forbidden zone. Like, I think that, like you said, with even R-rated movies are afraid to kind of cross that threshold. And I don't think that there should be any kind of restriction on that, because the thing is, at the end of the day, it's fiction. It's not real. You're not advocating, kids to be murdered. You're not advocating this stuff in reality. It's fiction. And if you're afraid to do that, then you have something where you're watching a horror movie and maybe there's like a 10-year-old kid in it, and you know that kid he might as well be wearing a suit of armor because he's indestructible. And that takes any kind of fear, any kind of worry that something might happen to him out of it.
Yeah, I mean, even as a child, and perhaps I shouldn't be admitting this, but I'd seen my fair share of R-rated movies, vastly under the age of the required 17 that they put on that. But one thing that I always got from even the R-rated films is that after the end of the day, even with something like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, everyone got up and walked off the set. No one died, with the exception of a few, horrible tragedies. But for the most part, everyone got up, everyone went home. The children that we saw that were terrified out of their minds, they probably after they called cut, there was someone, the monster probably just gave him a kiss or something. I mean, things of that nature where no one was traumatized over these particular things. That it's all magic, and yet at the same time, though, especially in America specifically, we're terrified of kind of looking a little bit deeper into art and what art is specifically trying to bring out in these particular extremes. Which, especially when you look at remakes uh, of international movies, specifically horror films, which is something you actually brought up, especially with J-horror. They don't understand at all what it is that what it is that these films are trying to go for, and so they feel like cheap knockoffs.
Yeah, there was a movie that came out a while ago, and it was called Pulse,
Mm-hmm.
and it was originally it was a J. I believe it was J horror,
Yeah.
and they remade it into an American the remake, and they completely missed the entire point of the film. The movie Pulse, major spoilers here, but the concept of the movie Pulse was that people at the time were using cell phones and were using technology and whatnot. And even though we had these this technology that was supposed to be pulling us together, it ultimately was driving all of us apart. It was making everybody very isolated. It was like, where when you go to like a restaurant and you see four people sitting at a table and they're not talking, they're all on their cell phones. It's that kind of thing. So it was a very, it was a very smart movie. I mean, there was a lot of, there was a lot more to it than that, but that was a
Yeah.
lot of the structure. I mean, it was a very sad movie. It was like, and the thing was, everybody was becoming so isolated and so depressed that they were killing themselves. And what the American remake is that the internet is filled with ghosts, and it's pulling people into the internet where all the ghosts are.
Oh God, yeah.
And like just completely not understanding it at all. And the thing was, they're like, when they're making it, they're like, we want to remain faithful to and it's like, you had no idea what the movie was about. You watched part of it and kind of made up your own movie around it. And then they did a couple of the movie has some really famous scenes in it, like some just beautiful, like iconic, horror scenes. There's a plane crash that's just amazing, and there's this one really long single take of a woman climbing all the way up to the top of this water tower and just diving off of it. And so they pretty much copied them like shot for shot, but they didn't understand the basic core fundamentals of the movie that they were actually remaking.
Yeah, there was another guy that I kind of follow. He goes by the Nerd Writer. He brought up something I didn't really think about in this. He was his criticism on Batman v Superman, which is films are comprised of two different things. They're comprised of moments and they're comprised of scenes, and especially when it comes to movies, if you don't have obviously moments are the kind of the money shot, because it's that image, the plane crashing, the woman climbing the water tower, which actually, when I first saw that movie, it kind of startled me a little bit, to be honest. But if you don't have scenes, if you don't have long drawn out moments, or long drawn out like scenes, things where people are interacting, setting up, building up what these moments are supposed to be, then they just feel cheap and contrived, and they don't really matter. They don't mean anything. And that's especially in more recent horror films. It's all moments, it's not scenes. Almost in all genres, it seems like everyone wants to be Michael Bay at this point, where they don't have to create or establish anything. They just want to get to the payoff. It's porn without the build up.
They're making the movie for the trailer.
I agree in that sense. In fact, some of the trailers are even better than the movies themselves.
Exactly.
Which is actually kind of something that I find very fascinating, because film right now, and movies specifically, are in serious trouble with the competition that they didn't have even 10 years ago. Because now we're actually getting TV that is able to rival in quality the things that we're seeing in the films. And on top of that, video games have become now part of the mainstream that more than it ever has before. And these are, I know that you've done some stuff on video games specifically. Your Deadly Premonition one, I just absolutely loved, uh, specifically. But out of curiosity, uh, what's your take on the kind of multimedia aspect of entertainment, and what are you seeing as kind of the ones that could be taking on film, or do you think film can actually rival?
Well, I think that like movies and video games, it's going to kind of all exist in the same space. I think that we're at the point now where we've got television, we've got movies, and we've got video games, and there's only so many hours in the day. And so you've got people that will, be playing a video game while simultaneously watching a movie or a TV show or something. And I think a lot of like I didn't initially understand like the fascination with something like Twitch. Like a few years ago when it first came out, I'm like a lot of people. I'm like, why would you want to watch somebody play a video game? And then you kind of get into the aspect of it. Like I stream on Twitch twice a week, and it's great because you build up a community, and you have people that show up, and they're there. Like the game is almost incidental. Like they're there to watch you play something. But they're there kind of for the hang. They're there to chat. They're there to, just to do something. And the game a lot of times is just fun. And if you get a really terrible game or a really like fun game or something that maybe people hadn't heard of or whatnot, then that will get people interested in it. Like I played a lot of times. What I'll stream like weird stuff. Like I'm not going to play like I have no problem with Call of Duty. I like Call of Duty, but there's a bajillion people out there that stream Call of Duty. So I'm streaming like weird stuff. I streamed Phantasmagoria, which was
I love that game.
Yeah, it was hilarious. Like I was, with the audience, and they were just cracking up because we're making fun of the bad acting, and so it was a whole like mixed thing. Like it just was an absolute blast. And that's the kind of thing where you're not quite getting that same experience if you're just sitting down and watching a TV show. Now, I mean, you could sit down and Mystery Science Theater up it yourself, but in this you're watching somebody and they're kind of providing their own commentary, and they're talking and interacting with the audience. So I think that as far as video games rivaling television, I mean, and movies, we kind of already have. I mean, video games now are the largest maker of money in the entertainment industry, and I don't think that people are like, oh, I can't wait for movies and television to go away. Well, that's not going to happen. I mean, I think that eventually traditional television will go away, but I mean, it's not like we're not going to have cable the way that it's currently out there.
That's
but
true.
I think we might have something more along the lines of what the internet is, where it's like, hey, I want to watch this, and you go and you watch this.
I think they said that like 10 million people a year are cutting the cord. And I mean, I myself, I've cut the cord about a year ago, and between Hulu and TV right now, especially in its current form, is basically a long form novel. I mean, if you look at movies as kind of a short story, even a 3-hour movie, and then you have a 10-hour TV series. I know that you recently had caught on to Stranger Things, which is something I've just started. But again, that is a longer form. That's a Stephen King novel as compared to an Edgar Allan Poe short story that a film would be. But yeah, I definitely get what you're saying about about TV in its current form kind of going away. We're not seeing so much of the episodic anymore, or even if it's episodic, there's some sort of overarching narrative that is playing out that's not being reset every 5 seconds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a lot of people like the Netflix model where, like you said, I mean, Stranger Things came out, and it's like, hey, you know what? Here's, the show came out. Here's the entire season. If I want to, I can sit down and watch the entire season. I'm not like, okay, well, The Walking Dead just started. Okay, I get to watch this episode this week, and now I have to wait a week, and then I get to watch the next episode. I mean, so that the traditional, series is going away because people were like, a lot of people thought with Netflix, they would, by putting an entire series up in one shot, they're like, oh God, people are going to get it, and then they're just going to watch that show, and then they're going to bail. And it's like, no, I mean, that is the perfect cheese. People are going to be drawn in. They hear, oh my God, this is amazing. Oh, I'll just tune in. I'll watch the full season and then I'll leave. And not to say that there aren't some people that do that, but a lot of people will tune in. They'll watch that. And then they'll be like, oh, wait. Oh, I didn't know they had this movie. Oh my God, they have this show. And then next thing you know, they're binge watching, 80 gajillion different things. and they're cutting the cord. They're getting rid of, standard cable.
That's true. So we're getting close to the end. Out of curiosity, now that now that we're about halfway through the year, and there are some pretty exciting stuff that's still coming out, in my opinion. But are there any movies that you're looking forward to that are coming out within the next 6 or 7 months?
Yeah, I'm actually off the top of my head. I know it's coming out very soon. I'm looking forward to Don't Breathe. I think that looks really good.
I'm curious about that one.
Yeah, that looks good. There's a movie called Shut In that I think that's coming out in October. That looks really good. As far as in the foreign market, I'm really looking forward to Sadoko versus Kayoko. That's the two antagonists from The Ring and The Grudge, and they're basically doing a
Freddy versus Jason.
Freddy versus Jason. So I think that should be a lot of fun. Very, not surprisingly, I'm looking forward to Rogue One, the next Star Wars movie. I mean, we got Gareth Edwards behind the helm, and I'm really excited about that one. But something that, a movie that is coming out that I cannot believe is going to exist and is either going to be the greatest thing ever or the worst thing ever is Boo! A Madea Halloween. I cannot wait to see this. The fact that this is made is just, it's amazing to me,
I have a love-hate relationship when it comes to Tyler Perry. It's something I feel like I have to do like a video on it at some point because I admire him as a filmmaker. I love the fact that there's this guy that, despite what the critics say, he makes movies that people want to see, and they're not always good. In fact, most of them are pretty awful, but he just has so much joy making them. I can't hate him for the stuff he does, and him doing Boo,
Have you seen the new poster for it?
Yes, I did.
The Halloween. Oh my God. It's going to be hilarious. Like, I mean, Madea, this 6 foot tall, I mean, he's supposed to be a woman, but it's Tyler Perry in a dress, and he's fighting I believe he's fighting zombies, vampires, and werewolves. This could be contender for movie of the year. Like, I mean,
oh man.
I mean, it's so absurd that it really could be wonderful or it could be awful. I mean, it's going to be a very dangerous, line to do. And the thing is, like with you, like you said about Tyler Perry, I don't particularly enjoy. I've tried to watch a few of his movies. I don't really like them. However, the thing is, he knows what he wants to make. He understands his audience, and he makes the movies that he wants to make, and they make bank. They make so much money. So the thing is, I can't fault him for that. He understands what his audience wants. He makes that, and they do well, for the people that they're aimed at. So with something like Boo, it's just so ridiculous that I am more than happy to be like, you know what, you went on a limb and were able to get this to come together. here's $11 for the movie ticket. You know, I'm giving you the money, you know, just
All
on
right.
the concept that you were able to make this happen. Whether or not it works is
Mm-hmm.
up in the air, but I really hope it does. I
I
think.
was thinking you were gonna say Ouija too.
Oh yeah, I'm also looking forward to Ouija 2 because that's by the guy who did
Oculus.
Hush and Oculus.
Yeah.
Yes, I forgot about that. I mean, the trailer I'm a little iffy on. However, you know, I wasn't really crazy about the trailer for Oculus either, and I thought
Mhm.
Oculus was fantastic. So I'm more than willing to give Ouija 2 a shot,
I
especially because
was
Ouija was
when I heard that they were
scary.
doing Ouija 2, I rolled my eyes really bad, and I had no intention of seeing it. And then I just happened to accidentally catch the trailer. I think it was like at the beginning of, I want to say, one of the summer movies. And as soon as they showed that there was the trailer for Ouija, just like, no, no, that's not Ouija. Ouija was that suck that was last year. This actually looks interesting. I even now I'm like, but I love the fact that the trailer actually promises scares and actually promises that this. I mean, it'll probably be contrived at some point because it's Blumhouse, but especially coming from this filmmaker. And I actually saw Hush. I want to say about a couple of months ago, and that really was good. For me, that's one of the reasons why I don't know if uh, that crap, I can't believe I forgot the name of it. The one with the blind man. Uh,
Oh, Don't Breathe.
don't breathe. To me, I don't know if that's going to be able to hold a candle, you know, compared to Hush. But uh, it's like, okay, I'm definitely down for Ouija 2, and I that was like the last thing I ever thought I would ever say this year. Um, you know, quite other than I'm voting for Trump, which that'll never happen. But uh, I am going to go see Ouija 2, and I will actually pay the theater price to go see it, which is something I again didn't think I would ever say. So we are running out of time. Was there anything you wanted to plug? Anything you wanted to say? We will be putting something on the in the comments or the in the link below for your show, which I implore everyone to go check out. His stuff is really good. I can't say enough good stuff about it. But was there anything you want to plug?
Well, first, thank you. But yeah, if you want to check out my stuff, just look up GoodBadFlicks on YouTube. You can also find me over at escapistmagazine.com. They have a bunch of my stuff over there as well, and as well as a lot of other really good variety of content. So yeah, and you know, and if you, I'm on your basic social media outlets, Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff. So,
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and I cannot wait to see the next stuff you're coming up with.